Hello and welcome to the second ever episode of Bullish Baking. This is much like my Mathghamhain morsels videos, but baking. So the last one I made the Irish car bomb cake, and this one I'm going to show you how to make a quintessential holiday item, which is of course freshly baked bread. So to do that, I currently have a quarter cup of lukewarm water that I've already put in one leveled tablespoon. That just went out of focus. One leveled tablespoon of sugar, and into that we're going to be adding some yeast. And in order to make this as easy on everyone as I possibly could, I was able to actually find the recipe for the very first type of bread that I ever made. So I am using a recipe for the most part. I'm going to go off recipe when it comes to adding the right amount of flour, because you need to go off recipe in order to get the right feel of the dough. But for right now, I'm on recipe, so this is going to be one leveled tablespoon of yeast. My tablespoon is a little bit too big to fit into the container, so I had to be a little bit messier than I would want to be. But it worked. So, into there goes the yeast. And now you want to quickly stir that up. You can use whatever your favorite utensil is for stirring. You can use a fork, you can use a whisk, you can use whatever. You can use the same spoon that you just used. I'm going to use my 2-tine fork, because my 2-tine fork will do an admirable job of this. So, get that in there, just mix it in. Make sure that the yeast isn't just sitting there, but incorporated into the liquid. And make sure that it doesn't get stuck to the sides or to your utensil in any sizable amount. You want as much of it in there as you can. So I'm going to scrape down the sides a little bit more. But this is just going to go into a warm, slightly dark area to froth up for about 10 to 15 minutes. Once it's frothy, you know that the yeast is good, you know that it's active, and it's doing its job. So we will be back and we'll start mixing together the other ingredients, some of which are already around, so let me just let you know what those are. So I have 2 cups of whole milk, which are also lukewarm, just like the water was. I have 2 tablespoons of a really good butter. Typically use unsalted. If you only have salted, then just adjust the salt a little bit. This is another tablespoon of sugar over here, and then 2 teaspoons, again all of these are leveled measurements, 2 teaspoons of salt. In this case I'm just using one of my preferred fine grain salts that I have, which is a pink Himalayan. You can use table salt, you can use whatever type of salt you have available. You just want it to be fairly fine grain to your salt, and you'll be in good shape. And then, of course, we have our bread flour. That's pretty much the ingredients for this bread. We will use a little bit of a preferred cooking fat. You can do olive oil, you can do butter, you can do lard, you can do tallow, whatever your preferred cooking fat is. We'll use a little bit of that for greasing. And like I said, I'm going to go a bit off the recipe when it comes to adding flour, because I do this by touch rather than by the written amount. And a good chunk of the time, in recipes, they have too much flour stated in the recipe. Because it depends on your elevation, depends on your humidity, depends on a bunch of different factors. So you'll either have too much or not quite enough, and you need to know by touch how much flour is enough flour. And I'll try to explain that to you guys as I go through this. So I will see you after this mixture is nice and frothy. Okay, so here we are, back again. As you can see, that yeast, water, and sugar mixture really frothed up nicely. So, now then, into a large mixing bowl, we're going to add our 2 cups of milk. In this case, I'm using a really nice, just whole milk. You can use 2%, you can use 1%, you can use skim if for some reason you want to use skim. I won't question you too much about your life choices, but I will a little bit. If you want the best flavor, go for whole milk. Then in will go the 2nd tablespoon of sugar and those 2 teaspoons of salt. And the frothy water, sugar, yeast mixture, which, let me grab a spoon to scoop that out. And I also melted down the butter a bit. It's not entirely melted down, but that's also going in here. So let me try to get as much of the butter out. There we go. And as much of the yeast mixture out, because the yeast mixture is the secret to making this a absolutely delicious, light and fluffy texture bread. Though, if you're at all like me, your bread turns out oddly dense despite being light and fluffy. So, it tastes beautiful, it looks beautiful, it feels beautiful, but for some reason, what would normally be 1 pound loaf of bread seems to weigh more than 1 pound of bread. And that's even before I start showing you guys, which I will in later videos, how to make my hangover loaf, or as one of my fellow minions, Skeptalk, has dubbed it, Lambus loaf. So, now then, I'm getting a sieve out, and I'm going to start using my strong bread flour that I mentioned earlier. So, you do want to make sure that you're using bread flour. You do want it to be a fairly strong bread flour. My preferred flour that I use is King Arthur brand. This is the one that I found early on, and it's the one that I like the most. So what you want to do is sift your flour in as you mix your liquid, and you want to add the cups of flour 1 at a time or 2 at a time, but you want to add them slow. You can add 2 early on, like right now I'm going to add 2 more cups of flour, but after that I'm going to start adding 1 to less than 1 to 1 cup of flour at a time. Each time I'm going to put it through a sieve. This is just to make sure that the flour's nice and broken up, prevents as much clumping. We'll still get some clumping, but it prevents some of the clumping. And you always want to make sure that your flour is in good shape, so no meal bugs or anything like that in it. One thing that you can do in order to keep meal bugs out of your flour, if you've been having trouble with that a lot, is put a bay leaf in your bag of flour. The bay leaf kind of drives off the meal bugs, so you don't have to worry about them as much. So with those 3 cups of flour, it's already a thick paste type consistency. This doesn't let me sit anywhere. I'll sit it there. So this is already a thick paste. That's not together enough. And you can, of course, use a stand mixer for this. You can use it with the bread hook, or dough hook, rather. You can use a full-blown bread machine. I don't like using those machines because I like doing it all by hand. So there's 3 cups of flour in. Still needs more flour. So we're going to be adding a couple more. I'll start adding 1 cup at a time. Because like I said, the recipe itself calls for 6 cups. I find that normally I don't need 6 cups. But occasionally I will actually go to 6, and depending on the environmental conditions, depending on the humidity and all that, sometimes I actually go a bit above 6. So I'll add in my 4th cup. Tap my flour in. It will definitely be able to take this entire 4th cup, so I'm not worried that I'm adding too much flour in one go. I can tell that it'll take this and maybe a little bit more beyond just by the look of it and how it feels as I'm stirring it. But you want to keep stirring it until it starts to come together. And then you can start getting your hand in. Until then, I just use my wooden spoon, or wooden paddle in this case. This still feels tacky, very tacky. So it's going to need more flour. So this is the point where I'm going to start dialing back how much flour I add at any given time. So I'll add about a 1/2 cup. And now get back in there with this. That's starting to come together a little bit more. Let me get some flour off the side of the bowl so that I can coat up my fingers with it. This is still a very sticky dough, but it's getting to the point where I can start kind of mushing it together by hand rather than just using the wooden paddle that I'm using. So let me set that to the side. Get this. I'll need a little bit more flour. I'll add another 1/2 cup at the moment. That was probably a little bit less than a 1/2 cup. So we're at about 5 cups. Oh, let me get this off. I don't want to get my watch all messy. And I'm just going to start kneading this by hand in the bowl still because it's a bit too wet and a bit too sticky for me to go to the pad that I'm going to use. when I'm kneading it in full. But there's still a lot of flour in this bowl. So I'm just kind of knocking it down, moving it around, knocking it down, moving it around. Getting more of that flour off the bottom of the bowl and into the dough. And you want this to end up not really sticky, you want it more silky. And I'm going to quickly reset up because I'm going to get a pad out to knead my dough on. I'm going to add a little bit more flour, but that I can do on the pad. So I will catch you guys up once I have my kneading surface set up. Okay, so I have the pad that I'm going to be using as my work surface set up. So let me get this floured for its use. And I'll use about another half cup just to flour my work surface. Spread that round, get my hands coated up. That'll help keep the dough from sticking to me as much as it will want to. Turn the dough out, sprinkle on that flour from the bowl, and kind of mash your dough around, fold it in half, mash, fold in half, mash, fold in half, mash, and you want to get a bit of a rhythm going. Now, depending on how much upper body strength you have, you might find it hard to knead a ball of dough with just one hand. If you're having trouble, use two. Or use a machine. That's an acceptable way of doing this. I'm just the sort that likes to do it all by hand. So you functionally want to mash it, turn it a bit, mash it, turn it a bit. As you do this, it'll get a bit sticky just because it doesn't have quite enough flour yet. And the flour that was on the surface is starting to get absorbed in, and sometimes you need to swap hands in order to get it to different parts of the work surface. So I need some more flour on this surface. So let's add about a quarter cup. So I might actually be near the 6-cup usage this time. But there's still a fair bit amount that I might not need to use. And you want this to get to be a nice, silky, malleable dough. So this is starting to get there and starting to look really nice. You should be able to just pull the dough so that you can kind of form it into a ball. And just keep moving it around. If it starts getting too sticky, slide more flour underneath. But as you work it, it'll get less sticky. And you really want to knead this dough for a fair bit of time in order to make sure that it has everything mixed throughout and it develops the right amount of gluten. And this is starting to get a bit too sticky on the surface, so mix in more flour. And like I said, if your arm is getting too tired, use 2 arms. If it's too difficult, even using 2 arms, use a standing mixer with the bread hook, or the dough hook attachment, rather. And you'll be able to make a fantastic bread with that. And if you have a bread machine that's able to mix the dough as well, go ahead and use that. So again, just going to kind of pull the dough. Needs a little bit more flour. This is maybe 1/8 of a cup. Just flour the surface of your bread. And flour your work surface if you aren't using a nice silicone mat like I am. The silicone mat makes it so I don't need to use quite as much flour to keep it from sticking. And this is feeling about right, but need to keep working it to make sure. And again, all I'm doing for this is I'm kind of pulling from the inside and rolling it to the outside. Just a little bit more, and that should be a nice dough. Like I said, you want it silky, smooth, beautiful dough that you can just kind of gather up in a bowl, pinch the back a bit, and you have a beautiful looking dough. You want it to be smooth, you want it silky on the surface. You don't want it really powdery on the surface. You don't want it sticky on the surface. You want it smooth. And if you see, just like I did as I started rolling this, a little bit of area where it started sticking more, add a little bit more flour, just quickly knead that together, form it back up, and this will be beautiful. So this is going to go into a large oiled bowl, and it's going to be in there until it doubles in size. So I will catch you guys back once this has doubled, and I'll let you guys see the next part, which will again be some more kneading, because after it proofs this first time, you need to knock it back. That'll make sure that the air from the yeast, that CO2, is distributed throughout the entire dough rather than just these large pockets. But I will see you guys once this is done rising. So, I forgot to mention some important aspects of setting up your bread to rest. Again, you're going to want to stick it in a warm, somewhat dark area of your house, on top of your refrigerator in your kitchen if you keep your house fairly warm, or if you keep your house cool like I do. You kind of have to set aside a room early on in the day just to let it warm up a bit. Then you want to very lightly grease the bowl So I recommend using a nice light oil, a vegetable oil, a canola oil. You can use an olive oil if you want. Just something that's liquid in room temp. Give it a nice thin coat around the entire surface. And then you can use cling film to cover the bread. If you use cling film, oil the cling film as well. And then just very lightly put it down on top of the bread. Don't press it down, don't seal it around, just lightly drape it over the bread so that it isn't exposed directly to the air. At least not entirely directly to the air. If you aren't using cling film, then you want to use a kitchen towel or two, and you want to wet it down with some warm water and wring the water out so it's very slightly damp. And then again, drape it lightly over the bowl. Don't press it down over top of the bread. Don't pack it in around. You just want it draped over the surface. That way the bread has plenty of room to rise. It isn't fighting past your barrier that you put up. And the warm water just keeps it nice and moist as it's rising. Now I'll leave you guys off until this is risen. Okay, so here we are. The dough has a bit more than doubled in size, as you can see. So right before we start working the dough, what we're going to do is we're going to grease our baking tin, or loaf pan in this case. And not really a baking tin, my baking cast iron. I have a nice cast iron loaf pan here, which I'm going to use to make half the dough. This is about a 1 pound loaf size tin, or bread pan. So you can use whatever your preferred oil is for this. Use either an oil that is liquid at room temperature, or do what I do and melt down your preferred oil or your preferred cooking fat. In this case, I melted down some lard, and I'm just going to rub it around the inside of the bread pan, which I've already done. And then I'm also going to be doing a bowl of bread. So I'm just rubbing down the sheet that I'm going to use for the bowl. Because I've made about 2 pounds worth of bread dough. So 1 pound into my 1 pound loaf tin. 1 pound will be turned into a bowl of bread. So let's turn this out. And like I said, what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be doing the knockback. This is just to make sure that all the gases are distributed evenly throughout the bread. So once again, you want to knead your bread. This one won't be as long of a knead. So the first one, you want to do probably at least a 5-minute knead, if not longer. I did a bit longer. I think I did a 6 or 7 minute knead. For this one, you just need a couple moments, just enough to make sure that you've punched it back. There's not going to be an enormous air bubble where all that carbon dioxide formed up. And then once you get it to this point, you want to split your dough. So, depending on what you have, you might have a bench scraper. If you have a bench scraper, fantastic. Use your bench scraper. I have a plastic dough bench, or plastic bench scraper for cutting my dough. And you just want to cut it into two about equal-sized hunks of bread dough. One of them I'm just going to kind of elongate by just lightly pulling as I spin it around in my hand. And that one is going to go in here. This is now ready to rest for its second rise. So I'm going to again cover this over, leave it in a warm area so that it can do its second rise. And this one will be for a little bit shorter time, but again you want it to just about double in size. And when it's doubled in size, I'll end up cutting it to give it a nice little design on its crust. So the second bit of bread is, remember when I was making that ball of dough, how I was just stretching from the inside to the edge? Just going to do that again. Form it up into a nice elastic, smooth ball of dough. Thunk that right down into the middle of my tray that I'm going to use to bake. And this one I'm also going to score up before it goes into the oven, but that is also now ready to be put in a warm area until it about doubles in size. So I will see you guys back after my bread dough has doubled. Okay, so here we are. My bread has risen up nicely in both the bowl and in the loaf pan. So, I said that we're going to score the bread. I do this just to help me identify what type of bread I've made. And also it looks nice. So, this is just a simple country white. So for my simple country whites, I do the simplest of my markings, which is 3 slashes on the bowl and only 1 slash on the loaf. And I do this with a clean razor blade for those that have seen what I look like. It's very clear I don't use razor blades, so this is my one and only use that I get out of them. Scoring bread. So I'll buy a thing of razor blades. You want to make sure that you wipe the blade clean, because a good number of them come with a light covering of oil. So you want to wipe that oil off. The ones that I use are just the little butterfly blades. These are really nice. They're ice-tempered stainless steel, good quality razor blade. When I did have to shave, this was the same type of razor blade that I use. But now that I don't have to shave, this just becomes my bread razor. And what I do is I'll score the bread, and then I'll just store my razor until the next time I need it, after making sure that it's clean. And I can get a good number of uses out of a single razor blade. If it starts looking a bit janky, I swap it out for a new one, and I'm good to go again. So these are going to go into a 375 degree oven, which I've preheated. It was preheating while these were rising. And then they'll come out once. When you knock on the bottom of them, they sound hollow. That'll allow the tops to become nice and golden. If you want to get a even more golden color and a bit of a thicker crust, what you can do is you can do an egg wash or rub the bread down with butter. I'm just doing the naked loaf, effectively, where I'm not doing any of that. But I shall catch you after these come out of the oven. It's going to be about 50-ish minutes, but again, this is something that really changes depending on temperature and all of that. So the real measure is once you reach the point where you can knock on the bottom of the loaf of bread and it sounds hollow. So I'll catch you guys after that, and I'll show you a slice of this bread after it comes out. So here we are. The bread is fresh out of the oven and still very hot, but to show you guys what I meant by that hollow sound that you want, like a damn drum. And that's how the brule sounded. The loaf sounds very similar. You want that nice hollow sound. That means that the bread is baked up light and fluffy and just delicious. It also means that the inside has set. So now I'm just going to let it cool. And once it cools, I'll cut into it, and I'll show you guys what the inside looks like. So I'll be back in a few moments. Okay, so here we are. The bread has rested for a few moments, cooled down a bit so that it won't burn my hand as I cut into it. And you can see the bread has a very lovely, delicate crumb to it. So, what's the best way of tasting fresh bread? Well, of course, you get a nice bit of butter. And I think the other video that I'm going to put out this week, I might show you guys how to make homemade butter. Something simple, but it can really dress up something like this to fantastic levels. So I think I'm going to do that. You know, it's that time that always comes at the end of one of my videos. Let's see how it tastes. If I wanted to, I could have kept it in a bit longer, just to get a crustier bit of bread. Or like I said, the way that you really get a crusty bit of bread is do an egg wash or rub some oil on the bread before it goes in. But this is a fantastically light and fluffy, airy bit of bread. But as I said, my bread always ends up with a certain denseness to it. That I absolutely love. So, while it is very light and airy on the inside, it isn't something that... It isn't a bread that you eat and you go, oh, okay, that was just a bit of bread and perfectly fine, don't feel any full. This bread will fill you up. It's amazing for sandwiches, for toast, to serve on a side plate with your holiday meal, mop up the gravy and other drippings from the meal. Oh, this is absolutely amazing. I didn't do the best job at splitting the dough evenly, so my boule is a lot bigger than my loaf. But this is still just an absolutely delightful little bit of bread. This is going to be amazing. I'm probably going to take it into work later on this week and have that as part of my lunch. But just goddamn, I love this bread. Light, fluffy, but with a body to it that actually feels like you're eating something. Has an amazing taste to it. You guys have had fresh baked bread, I'm willing to bet. You know how much better fresh baked bread is than normal bread, and this bread is absolutely no exception. So, I'll leave you guys off with my normal. Try something new. Go out and explore, but it's a holiday meal. Enjoy the classics. Enjoy the simple foods done really well in large quantities that really exemplify holiday meals. Have fun with your friends. Have fun with your family. Enjoy the holiday season. Enjoy your food. And enjoy life. Have a good one, all.